thank you so much for coming to this talk on metacognitive mirroring for self-advocacy that sticks. I know that whatever brought you here, you're here for a very good reason, and most importantly, because you care so much about the kids and students that you work with in your life. So let's get started. I'm so glad to see you. It's great to have you here. I am Laurel Black, and again, our focus today will be on some adjustments you can make to how you interact with kids and how you invite them into the process of learning so that they can land on ways to advocate for what they need in ways that really make sense to them, feel right to them, and they can use when you're there and in the future. So a little bit about me and why I'm here to talk to you about this. First of all, again, what brought you here is your experience with kids, with students, and maybe even with yourself as a learner. So you are the real expert here. Our hope is to kind of be a beacon of the research and therefore the best practices that you may already be using. But what I'll share today hopefully will make you feel like you have expertise to bring to the surface, along with some suggestions that can really fine-tune your practice. So I'm Laurel once again, and my background is really being an educator, and that is where my heart is. I still work with students every day. I started my career as a high school teacher in Austin, Texas. Then I moved to the Boston area, got a degree in mind, brain, and education, and then worked as a middle school special education teacher and eventually was an administrator for middle school special ed, kind of top to bottom of supports. Now I work at the Research Institute for Learning and Development here in Lexington, Massachusetts, where I am an executive function coach with students every day, ranging in ages from elementary all the way beyond college and adults. And I also direct our team of coaches here. And very recently, just about a week ago, our new book came out that has a chapter that I co-authored with Dr. Lynn Meltzer on metacognition. So it's very relevant both to the work that I care so deeply about and the insights that I'll share with you today. So the book is called Executive Function and Emotional Regulation in the Classroom. Hopefully you're already chomping at the bit to learn more about that. Today you will get a taste of some of the ideas from that book and chapter 2, which is called Metacognition, the spark for igniting students' ability to learn how to learn. So we really hope you will check that book out. And today will be a really great teaser for you of a lot of the concepts in that book and how it informs our work and probably the work that you do with your students as well. So as you're joining us and thinking about what you're about to sit down and focus on, we love an agenda. So first we'll get started with something called the writing reflex, which is something that can really impact a student's emotion to take a suggestion or not. A lot of this talk will focus on why they sometimes don't take our suggestions. The next portion we'll talk about really cultivating clear and predictable classrooms so that kids can anticipate issues in advance and make a plan for how to advocate either in advance, in the moment, or kind of for the next time. Then we'll get into something I call metacognitive mirroring, which are just powerful kind of open-ended questions that, again, will put some of that metacognitive thinking onto the student rather than having the adult do the thinking for them. From there, you might think, okay, self-awareness is good, great if we can get accurate self-awareness. Then what do we do with it? That's what the takeaways will really be today, which is how to get students from this awareness and self-understanding into action, agency, and self-advocacy for whatever they can't arrange on their own. And then finally, we will have some very specific kind of activities, sheets, and suggestions to use in your class for self-advocacy that sticks. We'll wrap it all up at the end so that you can walk away feeling like you have strategies that are really ready to use tomorrow. So really curious question, right? Sometimes we try to help, we do our best, we give suggestions, we think we really understand, and somehow it almost feels worse afterwards, or students don't do it, or your kids don't take your advice. So we're going to anchor in this philosophy that kids really do well when they can. And so I'm going to kind of demystify what it is that's going on in their minds when they are resistant to your suggestions, or it can feel like that helping that you're offering actually hinders their growth. So again, you are here because you care. Let's imagine that we are someone in this dear student's life, this dear student here, Kim, who has just so much homework. And you care. So you may want to help and give a lot of suggestions that might start with phrases like, oh, why don't you just, or, I would just, or, you should really fill in the blank. And of course, you care, you're empathizing, you are validating their experience and how tough it is, and that, it's okay to cry. And then as you kind of step in to fix what's going on for them, sometimes it feels like being helpful actually is not helping, right? So when we say those, even as I started to say them out loud, I got this internal kind of gut reaction to them of leading away a little bit. So as we're about to get into, a lot of times for not only kids, but also with other adults, what these types of phrases and trying to help, they actually can feel like nagging. That word alone just gets us, right? That nagging sense. And so here's some of the psychology reasoning behind that. So when we think about what really drives us to do something, or even more powerfully, to change the way that we're doing something, right, to shift out of that status quo, there's a series of research called self-determination theory. And Daniel Pink, his book is pictured here, he really breaks it down into kind of a more accessible set of phrases in his book. This is all grounded in something called self-determination theory, which means I decided myself to move forward in a certain way. I'm motivated, I'm going to do it. So the keys to that from DC and Ryan and summarized in Daniel Pink's book is that we need to have a sense of autonomy, that the way we're doing it is our choice, that we are in control of what we do and how we do it. That's part one. In order to feel driven, we also have to have a sense that it's worth it, in the sense that it will be successful, right? So there has to be a sense of competence that it will turn out okay. And not only that what we're doing will work out or be successful, but it will actually help us learn, grow, or improve to a higher level over time. And then the third category is purpose, as Daniel Pink calls it, and DC and Ryan call that connectedness, that somehow whatever we're doing has to relate to our sense of self, who we are, and what we think other people value us for, right? So we'll get a little bit more into that. So those are the things that motivate us. There's also a lot of research about what helps us feel safe enough to take a risk, or safe enough to kind of explore new things. So safety and motivation aren't the same, but feeling like you're ready to advocate, ask for help, or go out on a limb like that, that will require a sense of safety, both in your individual students and in your classroom as a whole. So the elements of safety, very similar. As I list these off, you'll probably go, wait, didn't you just say those? Yes, because in order to feel ready to drive forward, we need to know that it's okay for us to do so. So the elements of kind of psychological safety and feeling comfortable enough to take a risk include familiarity, which is also predictability or having a sense of certainty. Now, I don't need to tell you in 2026 that there's so much uncertainty and unpredictability just in life in the world already. That can drain our sense of self-control and ability to navigate through challenges. So really think about this. If you're an adult in a kid's life, how we can kind of adjust on behalf of that and provide as much certainty and predictability as possible. The next one is that sense of coherence, and that's a psychological term for the way that you're acting aligns with who you think you are and how you think you are. So coherence is really based on your identity and sense of self, and that what you're doing is relevant to that, it's purposeful, and that somehow it will build connection with other people, or not just build connection, but it definitely won't compromise your connection with others. So those are the two kind of buckets of safety so far. The third one is a sense that you can do it, that there is clarity and that you think you'll be good at it. So that's called accessibility. Again, thinking that, yeah, I have this idea, but is it going to work? That's kind of the most basic element as we're talking about self-advocacy here. So again, you're here because you care. You would love to be able to just help Kim. Look at her. She's just melting down. She has so much homework. So I'm just going to give some examples of the things that are really good ideas that you might say because you care. And you know what? With some of these ideas, I bet you know a little bit about executive function too. So in this case, you have Kim, you really want to help her out. She's stuck in her homework, and you might say, "Oh, Kim, yeah, that sounds tough. Why don't you use a planner to write down your assignments every day? I can even do it with you. We can do it right after school, so we've got it all taken care of." Or, Kim, I know it seems like a lot of homework, but what if we break it into smaller chunks and then just do one step at a time? Here, come over. Let's do that, okay? Let's see how it goes. Or some of these, sometimes we say should. I know I let those slip sometimes. You should really study for just 30 minutes a night. That's not that much instead of all this cramming, right? If it's the last minute. Another one that we're talking about self-advocacy, Laurel, this number 4 looks like it's getting a kid to advocate, saying, Kim, why don't you just ask the teacher for help during office hours if you don't understand, and maybe polish it up with teachers love when you come to office hours, right? They have them for a reason. You should just go, just ask. Or, you just sit down and do it, you'd be done in no time. I know I've heard that one before. So as I read those out, you might think, yes, those are great ideas. Hold on, let me get those notes down, Laurel. And what I want to say is, hold on. What we're about to get into is that saying those phrases without inviting the kid into the process can actually do some damage. Now, those were great ideas. Those are ideas that have really saved some lives here when it comes to executive function and students struggling. So the reason that those might actually do more harm than good is something called the writing reflex. Now, this is a term from Miller and Rolnick, who are experts in kind of behavior change, and they really lay out something called motivational interviewing, which is used in changing behavior related to addiction. So substance abuse, smoking, some kind of diet choices. So this is really major public health concerns. And the root of motivational interviewing in their system is getting the person to change rather than changing it for them. So they posit that we all have this urge to fix a person's problem, right? Because we care, we have a desire to help. And it can often lead to those things I mentioned in the last slide. There's this impulse to be overly directive, tell them what to do, almost invite them, like, let's do this together, when really you're almost directing it and doing it for them because they're overwhelmed and you can tell they're not going to be able to move forward. The caveat is, let's say you went back with some of those shoulds, right? Oh, you should email your professor. You should ask for help. Why don't you just work on it with your friend, Kim? Then maybe you can figure it out together. So let's say your student does not roll their eyes at those things, right? This is a better case scenario. Even so, they may have already heard of those suggestions and they didn't work before, in which case that feels like it didn't work for them and they feel kind of stupid. That's going to compromise their sense that it's difficult, right? They're not going to feel safe enough to do that again. Or if they haven't tried it, then it's unfamiliar. If that's a new suggestion, they're going to have to flex that muscle and really think it's going to work for them, right? It better work out in order for them to do something that's new and uncertain. And you're not sure if you're allowed to do it that way, for example. The other thing is that they might get a no. If they ask for help, if they speak up, if they ask if they can almost do the assignment in a different way, they might get rejected. The teacher might say no, right? So there are good reasons why when we try to give suggestions, it almost comes back and hits us in the face. And that's because when we are uncomfortable, you'll notice these are the opposites of what makes us feel safe and ready to take a risk. It's because when our brain detects a threat and we're unsure and we're not really confident in how to move ahead, Susan David, a psychologist here in Boston, says that fear fills in those gaps. And what fear does is it prevents curiosity, it prevents open-mindedness, and most importantly for self-advocacy, it prevents that willingness to take a risk, right? So if fear is filling in those gaps, we need to think about that all of these helpful suggestions we're giving, they can actually do some damage. There's a darker side to trying to fix our kids' problems for them. It can spur defensiveness, right? That eye roll. As soon as you get an eye roll, that suggestion isn't going to go anywhere immediately. Now, I don't want to say, it turns out that kids are listening. They do hear your suggestions, but they're not using them, right? And often that's that defensiveness of, you just don't get it. I know, leave me alone, right? Those are some of the things that can come up when, especially teenagers, but kids and even adults get suggestions that they weren't ready for. Another thing when we try to fix someone's problems for them is it actually blocks their own sense of what's getting in the way in the first place, because we're jumping to the solution without really clarifying what's getting in the way first. So it doesn't build awareness. It might build a great solution, maybe, but it's not letting the person figure out what's getting in their way and what might work truly. Then it will also, like we saw in the last slide, when we're in that state of defensiveness, it prevents problem solving or thinking creatively about what to do about it. And ultimately, as those things start to stack up, it will actually damage the relationship to the point where a kid might not even want to hear what you have to say or partner with you on solutions. So we want to be really mindful of jumping in with solutions. Even the best of intentions can really get caught up with the righting reflex working against it. So not to worry, we are about to get into what to do, what to say, and how to kind of brainstorm and build metacognition with kids themselves so that it feels like they're coming up with the ideas, then they will be motivated to try them out, and then they will be ready to adjust those strategies and approaches if they didn't go perfectly the first time, which they probably won't. But by building a foundation of metacognition first, it will really help contribute to that motivation to try something new and then adjust it depending on how it goes later. So that was the righting reflex. Again, that's that kind of compulsion for us to fix from a desire to help, but that can often kind of get in the way of a solution sticking and for kids advocating for it themselves later. So next we're going to talk about being able to offer that predictability to students so that your classrooms are clear and predictable. I just said, maybe you could predict, I would say predict twice, because kids do well when they can. So the more we can clarify and lay out expectations in advance, the more they'll be ready to either adjust on their own or advocate along the way. So one smart strategy that we're going to offer you, it's in your resource guide, is something called the ERAS model. And I'll be coming back to this in a few different ways. The first way we're going to use it is anticipating obstacles with kind of a class lesson or activity. Now, when we say obstacles, an obstacle isn't an obstacle unless it causes a problem, right? So with the ERAS model, the foundation of the ERAS model is that often difficult emotions arise that are unpleasant to signal us that our expectations and our current reality are not aligned. There's somehow a gap between expectation and your current reality that you're experiencing. So that's the E and the R of the ERAS model. In a few minutes, we'll get into the other two letters. But I just love this visual that, we think things are going to go in a nice straight line. We've done it before. We know how to get there. And in reality, there's obstacles that come up, unexpected things happen. Some of them are predictable, some of them are unpredictable. So what we can do for those unpredictable ones is try to make sure that we've taken care of the predictable ones in advance, right? And so as an educator, as a counselor, as a parent, you can do that by going above and beyond to make sure that your classroom, your directions, your expectations are clear, that they are accessible to students, that students feel like they actually can get started even with a small step, that the things that they're being asked to do are in some way familiar. That doesn't mean always do the same thing, but the approach that they start with is something that is familiar to them or tapping into some of that prior experience or knowledge, and that coherence, that it relates to kids' sense of self and what matters to them and their peers. Usually peers is a big one. So we do have a poster of this on our website. You can get this and put it up in your classroom. It's really simple. That link is also in your resource guide. So again, the ERAS model is based on there can be big emotions when any of us experience a gap between what we expected and our current reality, right? Maybe we don't have much energy. We right now actually don't have that much time. Maybe there's people here that we didn't expect and we're feeling a little bit judged. And then what we do is brainstorm with kids how they might want to adjust in the moment and figure out how to get started. So this is a way that you can use this kind of flow of anticipating obstacles in your classroom before you even get started with an activity. So you can clarify those expectations in advance by saying, okay, now that we've read all the directions, class, and we've reviewed our expectations, I've given a model, what expectations do we have for each other? Are we going to be noisy? Do you want to work in silence? Do you want to put headphones on? What expectations do I have for you? Make sure you have that rubric and directions in front of you so that you can redirect yourself back to what it is you're truly working on. And then what expectations do you have for yourself? This is a huge one for kids, especially if you have any perfectionists in the mix, which you do. What do you expect now that you know what this assignment is asking of you, what this activity is asking of you? What do you expect of yourself? Are you feeling like you're ready to really go above and beyond and be perfect today? Or are you really tired and thinking, maybe good enough is okay for today? And that's up to your students to decide. And that's where it gets to advocacy. The more we leave these decisions in the students' hands, the more they can reflect back and think, I did it, I turned it in. I actually think I could do better next time. So again, these are set up so that students, either individually or as a group, can really make these decisions for themselves as they move forward with your activity or their work. Then the R is that reality check of, okay, class, now that we've read the directions for this assignment together, we've reviewed the expectations, how are we really doing? How's everyone feeling today? I always had this pattern where first period was quiet but not engaged, and eighth period was wildly engaged but never quiet. So that's a really useful reality check. Maybe you have a class that meets different periods on different days. You can anticipate that reality that day or with that activity. And so with that, we would ask, okay, so are those expectations still realistic? Maybe you really wanted to do above and beyond work today, but that would take more time than we have for this class period. So how can we either adjust those expectations to meet our reality, or how can we adjust your reality or your approach to meet those expectations that we have? And we will get more into what that means, right? You might be saying, Laurel, what do you mean adjust reality? That's going to be some of the juiciest stuff we get to a little bit later today, is examples of some of the adjustments that kids can make before they decide how to get started. So again, in order for you to have a classroom where students feel ready to advocate, you'll want to make sure that directions and expectations are simple, clear, and broken down, that you do review those expectations and check for understanding both in advance and kind of periodically, and again, go back and clarify those expectations. I know this is just copy and paste this into every IEP. 80% of IEP accommodations are related to one of these three things. So again, this is just good teaching that I know you all are already doing. So you've done that, you get it. You're not going to boss kids around. You're not going to direct them. You're going to make sure your classroom is as predictable as possible. Next up, we'll talk about something called metacognitive mirroring and what it really takes for kids to advocate in the first place. So we love Zaretta Hammond, who is an author, educator, and has written a couple books. She just came out with a new book late last year, and she posits that to get students to shift from being passive learners to self-directed learners, one of the goals of education is not simply to fill students with facts and information, but to help them learn how to learn. And just think about that sense of agency, that sense of direction, and that sense of drive that kids can have when they figure out what gets in their way and then what can work for them instead. And then they're able to make those things happen, either by doing it themselves or asking for help to get those to happen. So as we step back and think about metacognition, big picture, it's the process of understanding your strengths and challenges, learning how you think and learn best, then developing strategies for some of those times where it might be harder to learn or do. From there, as we start to feel emotions related to some of those trials and tribulations we go through as we learn, that really clarifies our values, and that helps us figure out what goals are meaningful to us. So when we think back to that term coherence, really grounding the support you're providing to students and the coaching you're provided in the sense that those goals are meaningful to the student is going to go a long way rather than just giving suggestions that help. So that might feel very far from self-advocacy, but really grounding any suggestions or ideas in goals that are meaningful to the student is going to be part of building a metacognitive culture in your classroom. So as we talk about self-advocacy, any suggestion, any idea, any strategy that students might try, that's going to be built on a foundation of metacognition. And from there, we'd want to observe patterns of kind of strengths and challenges in context, right? That could be the social context of who's around, where, that could be environmental or even sensory. I know I never turn these fluorescent overhead lights on. I really don't like those bright lights. So the sensory inputs are something to consider. And then patterns of strengths and challenges, even just when, what time of day, what class period, those are really powerful to observe. Then once we've got not only strengths and challenges, but when, where, and with whom, that's part one, we then want to consider possible adjustments to either our expectations, adjustments to our approach, or adjustments to our accommodations as learners. I'm saying our as a learner. And as adults, we do have to do all of these things for ourselves. Then right here in the middle, we'd want students to be able to anticipate and plan for obstacles, right? So again, that when, where, and with whom, the more you as an educator can lay out kind of the schedule for the day, who's going to be there, what type of activity, will it be a group activity or an independent one, will it be outside or inside, that helps student be able to anticipate and plan for obstacles so that then they can adjust or advocate, again, either adjust for themselves or advocate to an adult or to someone else to do the things that they're not yet able to do for them. And then, of course, I wanted to make this a circle, but it was a little bit hard to read. So then we would reflect, check in with students to see how that adjustment, accommodation, or self-advocacy went for them, what they would change next time, and then how. So that's a lot of steps. So the reason I wanted to list all these out is because when I wrote and implemented IEPs, every student had a self-advocacy goal, right? It just makes sense. And so often it didn't really address or lead to specialized instruction about all 5 of these components. And that's why today I hope that you're able to take away kind of one of these, 2 of these, maybe all 5, but that being able to advocate really has a lot of components to it. But don't worry, we are about to get into how to build that metacognition first, and then after that, those activities for building self-advocacy that sticks. So I'm going to take a sip as you do some introspection. So I love this quote from Ethan Kross. He's a researcher at the University of Michigan, and he has a couple of books about the ability to kind of look inside, or even look inside kind of from a third person perspective, as a kind friend would give you advice, that type of thing. And he really encourages us to use introspection or metacognition in order to regulate and adjust our emotions and to live a life that we would want to live. So we'll get into a couple of activities from our SMARTS curriculum and some other ones that I've just come up with as a teacher myself that you can use that will build metacognition in kind of engaging, enjoyable ways in your class. So the first one is from our SMARTS curriculum. It is lesson 1.1. It's the first one you start with, and it's called the Know Yourself Venn diagram. So there is a whole lesson that comes before this. This is kind of the takeaway activity for it. So with this, there's just a list of different elements of school. A lot of them are different classes and expectations, and kids can sort them into strengths or challenges. And another way we like to do it with younger kids, or even to find some nuance in that sometimes category, a lot of kids have that, they say, well, it depends, is I love having just a set of red, yellow, green cards on hand, or having kids color code on their paper, red, yellow, green, for how they feel about these. So green in this case is things that the student felt confident about, right? Being a good friend, writing, and spelling are things they feel confident about. They really did not feel confident about remembering things and working with others. And they said, it depends, or I feel okay, right? You can differentiate those with your students, but it depends on, yeah, I bet paying attention is there in the middle. It depends what you're asking us to do, miss. So this is another way to build metacognition. And we wouldn't just have kids plot these out themselves. We would do this with almost follow-up questions after every single card. We would ask a lot of questions about the thinking they're doing as they're even placing these cards. So again, these kind of cut out little visuals are part of our SMARTS lesson. So you can choose if your students are ready for kind of writing these, or if you want to do it as a card sort with the visuals. This is something else I've done for students where I've gotten permission from their parents to do some psychoeducation around ADHD. So this, I'll give the caveat of some of these activities are just things I came up with as a teacher over time. So I'm hoping that as you attend this talk and think about how you'll bring it to life, you're also getting ideas for how to come up with your own teacher strategies. So that's what this one is. This was just a list of a lot of traits that I noticed about ADHD over time, both in my students, and I do have an ADHD diagnosis myself, so things I noticed in myself. And it's things that are not good or bad, okay? They're things like energetic. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it's not a good thing, right? Being competitive, not good or bad. It really depends on the context. Being fidgety, right? That can be a good thing if you're playing a sport. Maybe you can direct that energy. So I had students kind of sort these into yes, kind of, or it depends, and no. And you'll notice kids sort this the way they want. So we had some in the yes category, and then man, this kid really hates checking their work. They're very fidgety, they love music, and sometimes they stop listening, right? So they are able to almost define their scale on their own, which gives them a little bit of a sense of agency. So I want to pause and just say this activity alone is self-advocacy. Because from here, you can easily say, okay, so it looks like we have a list where you might want to, well, don't tell them this, they might want to ask for help. They might want to do it a different way. They might need extra time. So this is a list that gets started with, okay, so, what context in school or with what expectations might you want to advocate or have a strategy to use? So then, again, you notice I bit my tongue there. You might want to say you need a strategy when you're expected to be quiet and still, right? Instead of telling that student that strategy and getting caught in the writing reflex, here is one of the things I'm most excited to show you today, which is something called the metacognitive mirroring with powerful questions. So this is just a collection of some open-ended questions. Going back to the motivational interviewing questions, they have something that's called the ORS categories of questions, which is, let's see if I know these, open-ended questions, affirm what you hear back, reflect what you hear back to that kid so they can get a sense for what is that they're saying. And I don't remember what S is, but I promise it's captured here. So in the metacognitive mirroring questions, they're based on that ORS framework. And these are just, again, some questions I came up with myself that relate to putting the thinking, reflecting, and metacognition back on students rather than you giving them choices for what you think is going on in their mind. So as an example, as you release students to their independent work and they get to make a choice, maybe they get to choose a prompt, choose a character, choose what type of fun project they're going to produce, you might ask something like, oh, I see you picked the wildfires in Maui as your environmental studies topic. What makes choosing that topic and making a presentation about it feel important to you? Then anytime they're getting stuck, if they can ground in the relevance and that coherence with themselves, any strategy they come up with, they're going to be more willing to use because it's grounded in their sense of who they are and what matters to them, right? If they're feeling stuck about what choices, you might offer, okay, well, do you want to brainstorm some options together and then you can decide which one feels right to you, instead of saying, okay, well, I know you like dinosaurs. Do you want to do the dinosaurs one? Again, sometimes that's appropriate, but it's not building much metacognition, right? I'm not saying don't do that. It's just, it's not going to build metacognition the way it would to be, okay, what's your vision for that dinosaur project? Now that you've picked dinosaurs, what are you envisioning you might do next, right? So building that awareness of not only how they're doing now or what got in the way, but also kind of that positive sense of where they're headed, that is so powerful to students, not only to feel a sense of agency, but to anticipate where it might get more challenging. So a couple of other questions, as you're circulating and you might notice something is up or something's a little off with a student, you, instead of pointing to the direction or over directing, you could say, okay, can you let me know right now, based on what we went over and what you've got going so far, tell me what this assignment is actually asking you to do. Could you explain it if a new student walked in, what the assignment's actually asking you to do? If they're picking a strategy, dig a little deeper. What makes that strategy make sense for this step, right? Build the metacognition. Again, these aren't phrases you always need to use, but they are phrases that will build a sense of what a student is doing and where they're headed and what might get in the way, which would lead them to need to advocate, right? So coming back to self-advocacy, this is building the foundation for the sense of where they're headed and what they might need to get there. Another one that comes up a lot in independent work is thinking of alternatives if a kid is stuck, right? So, what would success look like on this step? Or what is a 4 out of 5 version of doing this project, right? How would you envision it? And then, okay, what would it take to make that happen? Or if they are truly stuck, what would you adjust to make it work? So these, again, there are a lot to say. You're not going to say these all the time, but they are gold for building self-awareness and metacognition. So you might be saying, but Laurel, I have a really good idea. I really know it'll work for the student because I know the student well. Maybe it's your own child, right? That's fine. There are times where it does save time, energy, and strife to just give a solution. I would encourage you to just preface those solutions with some of these phrases to posit them a little bit more artfully. So you could say something like, do you mind if I share an observation if a kid really is stuck? They will usually say, okay, or sure. You could also say, oh, you've really got me thinking. Could I offer an idea that works for some students with similar concerns or in the same type of assignment? So we're asking permission. We're asking for their consent. And then again, I have an idea. Would it be okay if we take a look at this idea and you can let me know what you think? That question got cut off, but it's in your resources as well. So again, if you have the solution in mind, you know the kid, you really want to give it, please just build that sense of agency and ownership in the student first by prefacing that solution with one of these ways of asking permission. So then, great that we've built this self-awareness. Kids know their strengths and challenges in school. They've even maybe come up with ideas that are a shift of what they originally wanted. And we want to take that self-awareness and turn it into action. We want to turn it into autonomy and self-advocacy eventually. So in this case, if you're here and you work with students who struggle, that's probably why most of us are here. There's often a couple problems to solve. So in this picture in particular, I was working with a student where just tidiness and general hygiene were concerns both at school and at home. So we turned it into a game, which I listed out a bunch of different hygiene and tidiness related kind of concerns that might be true for a middle schooler. And I had the student kind of rank those of whether he thought they were all good, that was green, whether he said, I'm doing okay with this, it's not consistent, but it's okay, it's not a problem, that's yellow. And then we put some in red that were like, oh yeah, definitely not doing that one, that's nowhere close. I let this student sort those himself, and then rather than saying, let's pick your biggest problem to solve, or me choosing which one to talk to him about, or saying, hey buddy, we really got to talk about the deodorant, right? In this case, I suggested that I didn't suggest. I asked him which of the problems from the sometimes or yellow category felt like would be easy enough to get to the green category. So notice we kind of went with the low-hanging fruit here. We didn't pick a problem that has many, many, many layers and years of struggle. We picked one that was a low-hanging fruit. And so if you lean in and look closely, the one that he picked to work on was, I throw away my trash instead of leaving it lying around. Adults in his life might say that was a red problem to solve, but he thought it was yellow and he thought it was something he could do something about. So this is kind of like agency, autonomy, and letting him pick which of those problems he wanted to solve. Another idea is to help students when we're thinking about classroom norms around focus and distraction. So sometimes kids will say things and you go, yeah, maybe, but I don't think so. Instead of arguing with them about it, again, you can have them kind of rank and sort some of these things that will help them have a more productive class or day or homework session. This is from our SMARTS curriculum, and it's called our Focus Finder activity. And so for this one, just some examples is kids might say, oh, can I have a fidget, right? They're advocating. But are they advocating for things that actually help them? They might say, yeah, miss, I know that I have 30 markers scattered around my desk, but yeah, I'm using them to color code. They're helping me. And you go, you know, inside your head, you go, I don't know. It seems like they're just taking up space and you're doodling, but if you say so. Another one, oh, they're advocating. Music helps me focus, or I work better when my friends are around. Like, I've heard all of these things. What we would do is really consider those and have kids rank them. So again, this is called our, oh, sorry, not Focus Finder. This is called our Productivity Planner. It's an activity in our SMARTS curriculum, and it lets kids just kind of rank what helps them focus and what hurts their focus. And the nuance here is there's some things that will really fall in that it depends, right? Music helps me focus. Well, certain type of music helps me, but another type of music might actually hurt my focus. And then there's another fun SMARTS activity, I didn't show it here, where you can actually test these out, say with how many math problems can you get done in these different, you know, going back to these, okay, let's see how many math problems, like prove it. I used to say, prove that it helps you focus. How many can you get done when you're actively using your fidget, and how many can you get done when you're not using a fidget, right? So you can almost test these out and really get a sense of, okay, that's the reflection, right? Did it actually help you focus or not? So then once students have a sense of what will help them focus and what they want to work on, we love this activity. I apologize. It's called the Can-Do Goal. It's there again. The student resource is called the Can-Do Goal from our SMARTS curriculum. And there are other sessions at our conference that will tell you all about how great can-do goals are. In terms of the self-advocacy and metacognition focus of this talk, what we love most about it, or what I love most about it, is that not only do kids share their goal, they list very clear steps of how to get that goal to come to life and happen. And even more importantly, they anticipate and consider obstacles in advance and steps to overcome them. So great that we built that awareness. Great that we're starting to get some ideas for what will help us get started, get work done, live a great life. Let's make sure that we are also thinking about the steps it would take to get there and the obstacles that might get in the way. So we have another resource that we are offering in the resource guide, which as you have kids consider obstacles, either in advance or even in the moment, I came up with these to use with students in the moment, which is that if a student's funnel is clogged or they feel stuck, there's probably a good reason why. And these are just some examples of things that get in the way of a lot of our functioning, and especially students at school. So these are called our self-advocacy starter posters. They're not in the SMARTS curriculum, but they are included as a link in this talk. So these are just kind of fill-in reasons for what might be getting in kids' way. So they might be having challenges with organization. So for example, if kids aren't getting started, I don't know why, and they might not know why. They might not be able to articulate it, but when they're given some of these choices, they might say, let me look at this organization one. My mom says I'm disorganized. Let me see. Yeah. I don't know what to start with. I have too many ideas to start. That's a common ADHD one. I have too many good ideas to start. Then there's some around regulation, kind of I'm worried it won't do well, or it feels like I'm so far behind it won't even make a difference. There's also space for if a kid is feeling a lot of strong emotions about something that happened outside of school, that helps you know as a teacher that there's certain things you can do as a teacher, and there's other things that student might just need some time or space. And finally, understanding it might truly just be confusing, or they might not understand the content. So we put these up as posters in our classrooms. So you'll notice they're color coded, so that the kids don't get overwhelmed when they're already feeling like their funnel is clogged. You could say, okay, Kim, I know this feels like a lot. I just want to get a better sense of what feels like it's getting in the way right now. Can you take a look at the yellow poster, the regulation poster, and I'll be back in a minute, and you can let me know which of those things feels like it's getting in the way for you. And if I'm not back by the time you figure it out, take a look at the other ones. But for now, just take a look at the yellow one and I'll check back in. So this, again, is building self-awareness and metacognition of that student in the specific context that they're in right in that moment. So this is both an in-the-moment strategy, but as you'll see in a little bit, using this as an in-the-moment resource, kind of as posters on the wall, helps us recognize patterns of where we'll need to anticipate either adjusting or advocating later on. So as we shift from that awareness of ourself in context to doing something about it, let's get into some of our strategies for self-advocacy that actually sticks. So first up, a lot of my awareness of the writing reflex and kind of motivational interviewing type open-ended questions comes from collaborative problem solving, which is a training from the Think Kids program at Mass General Hospital's Department of Psychiatry. So they have amazing programs for helping adults who work with kids with challenging behaviors. And it is rooted in building metacognition and capacity for problem solving in very structured conversations with adults. So they have some really great kind of phrases and sentence starters that I'm showing you here. I encourage you to attend their training and really become a pro at using them naturally and automatically. They break some of these kind of conversation starters into 4 categories, starting with just clarifying what it is that's getting in the way for students. So if we think back to the posters I just showed you, you might say, hey, Kim, you know, it seems like there's something tough about getting started with homework that's been tough lately. What's up with that? Now, I will say, you might say, Laurel, that's not going to work. She's having a meltdown. You're right. These are phrases that you'll use after we've started to notice patterns. Maybe you've done that know myself Venn diagram or card sort before. You've done the ADHD card sort. You've talked with kids through things that might get in their way. You're going to use these types of phrases once you've already identified patterns where kids are having some struggles in your class or at home. Another phrase that I love to get started with one of these conversations is there must be something tough about getting started with math homework after you get home from soccer practice. Can you tell me more about that? Then after Kim says a little bit as she's bawling, right, as she's complaining, you let that out and you reflect back to her. Okay, let me see if I've got this right. Let me see if I understand what you're saying. I just want to get a good idea. Here's what I'm hearing. Let me know if I missed anything. And then you'll empathize and say, yeah, Kim, that would be hard for a lot of kids. Thank you so much for letting me know. That sounds really tough. Another one, probably my favorite one from Think Kids is this last one. I bet there's a good reason why, right? It seems like there's something It seems like there's something really tough about getting started with homework. I bet there's a good reason why, right? And so you can kind of weave these phrases together. Again, highly recommend you check out Think Kids to learn even more about these. So those pair really well with self-advocacy posters that are up on the board. However, there's about 12 solutions or causes for what might be getting in a kid's way. And that is really overwhelming. So what we encourage is to actually create individualized versions of these as you get to know kids, what gets in their way, and just patterns of some of what they might be needing to advocate about. So as you're narrowing down what is getting in the way, you'll want to have those posters up. Then the next part of kind of solving these problems together are brainstorming solutions together that student can try. So for example, if they say, well, I'm just really feeling overwhelmed by papers, instead of saying, well, do you want me to get you some folders? You'd ask a little bit more about what makes that paper organization hard, what they've tried, what they've noticed about that, and then you would move ahead to some solutions to try. Another version of this is using the ERAS model. We talked about it before as a whole class activity. We designed it to also use as an individual activity. So in this one, this is kind of an individual reflection sheet for kids to use. And in our SMARTS curriculum, it comes with a guide. So you'll have a student clarify the expectations of the assignment or the situation, the expectations they have of themselves. Then what's really powerful is this reality check part of, how are you feeling? What's getting in your way? To go back to those again, do you feel like you understand it well enough to fulfill that, or is it feeling a little bit confusing right now? So again, those posters pair really well with this. Once they've done the reality check, we have these posters to help kids brainstorm and consider ways they can adjust either the expectations they have of themselves to move forward or adjust their reality. Now, again, you might say, what do you mean adjust reality? I think that sounds a little bit wild, Laurel. So adjust reality really means to communicate what's going on or what you need. Read Self-Advocacy. Adjusting reality can also involve looking up alternatives, looking up resources, looking up a YouTube video that explains how to do it, looking up examples. And then a really powerful one that we often don't give kids enough opportunity to explore is adjusting their surroundings. This can be tricky at school, although I've seen some amazing classrooms that allow kids to kind of choose their sound with headphones, to decide where they want to sit, decide if they want kind of a weighted lap pad, that type of thing. But especially when kids get home and it's homework time or time to get started on work or studying, they can adjust their surroundings, right? Some students love to turn on their salt lamp and make a glass of tea, or they make their special version of lemonade that they tell themselves helps them focus, right? Whatever it is, there's ways that kids can take some agency, but to either adjust these things themselves or ask or advocate to be adjusted for them. So for the most part, the self-advocacy portion of today is focusing on this adjusting reality. There's some other elements of our ERAS model that's in our SMARTS lesson about adjusting expectations, which is more about perfectionism. But for the self-advocacy portion, it's kind of adjusting what you're communicating, how you're asking for it, any alternative approaches you could look up, or adjusting your surroundings. So I do have an example where I did this with a student who he was not going to class. He was struggling in 2 of his classes and he just was not going. And he was feeling really just ashamed. He was feeling ashamed of what was going on and that he wasn't going to class. So the first thing we did was kind of brainstorm, what are the expectations you have of going to class? Like, what do you think is expected of students when they show up to class or in order to show up for class? He said, well, you should be ready to listen, learn, and remember stuff in class. You need to be prepared. So you need to have your work done and you need to be ready to work. You also need to participate and be ready to talk to peers. So as we looked those over, I asked him to mark in yellow the ones that he's already pretty good at. And then we marked the one that was really the true issue that was getting in the way of him going to class, which is that he wasn't getting his work done. So he thought that he couldn't go to class because his work wasn't done. So instead of saying, that's ridiculous, you don't have to have your work done, you can still go to class even if your work's not done, I did not argue. Instead, we moved through the ERAS model. And next up, we brainstormed some ways to adjust the idea of not being able to get work done. So we really focused on, okay, your work's not getting done. What can we do about that? And this is where we brainstormed a bunch of different solutions. You could probably tell which ones are my solutions and which ones were his solutions to try. And then eventually he did choose one. And the way that we did that was, I'll go forward for a second. We actually brainstormed solutions, one on each sticky note, and then kind of ranked which ones felt most realistic to him to try. And what he agreed to do, which is something that adults in his life has been suggesting to him for a while, is to give himself a cutoff time. So he would check with his teacher about what the cutoff time should be. For example, I want you to work on this for no more than 30 minutes. Then you just need to stop, because he would kind of let his work time drift and drift and drift, where it wasn't really work time. It was just terror avoiding work time, right? We've all seen a little bit of that. So we don't just leave it at which solution do you want to pick. We say, okay, so you want to have a cutoff time so that you know when to stop working on your work, so you get some sleep. And we break it down into truly what are the steps to get that to happen, right? What adjustments will you actually make? So he said that in order to spend less time on his homework and be able to get it done enough, to meet the teacher's expectations. He would ask the teacher how long a given assignment should take and cut himself off after that time. This was a nudge that I offered as an option, was write that down on the sheet itself if possible, or write it down somewhere so that he could reassure himself that it actually was okay to stop working on an assignment even if it wasn't finished. So those are the really kind of practical, tactical steps for him to start with that solution. So we've talked about those posters. Those are great as a whole class display. And a lot of today's talk is about finding the patterns that students can then use to predict where they might need to adjust or advocate later on. So part of that really has to do with, if we're talking about self-advocacy, what are ways that students can phrase their requests or phrase their advocacy, speaking up, in a way that makes sense to them and sounds like something they would say. So this is an example where over time we kind of narrowed down which of those concerns from the self-advocacy starter posters were most common for that kid, most likely to arise. And then we made a specific card for that student and laminated it and really just narrowed down. So the examples we came up with were, if you don't know what to start with, that's what's got you stuck. You could advocate by saying, can you help me figure out my first step? Another one that we really love, it's on another student's card, is, could you explain this another way? Man, I would love to hear a student say that to me as a teacher. Notice none of these say, can you help me? None of these say, I need help. And there's a misconception with students and maybe even teachers that we say, I just wish you would ask for help. I hope you take away from this talk that that is not advocacy. If a student asks for help, you as a teacher are left to just take some guesses, which doesn't involve much metacognition, and it doesn't involve much long-standing success that sticks. So with these cards, we have predictable patterns of where a student might be stuck, right? I have too many ideas to start, that was always me, or I feel overwhelmed by my work. And then reliable phrases that we've already brainstormed with the student that we co-created that they could say in that case. So, can you help me break down the steps to get started? Or can you help me pick my best idea? I have a lot and I don't know which one to go with. So for any solution, for any idea, for anything we're ready to go try, whether you suggested it or the student came up with it themselves, collaborative problem solving also offers us this nice litmus test that we like to check in with kids before we kind of launch into those steps to get started. So we would want to check, okay, does this idea of, let's say, having that cutoff time, does that solve your concern, buddy? Okay, yeah, tell me more. Does it solve the adult's concern that you're getting work turned in but not losing sleep over it? Does it cause any other problems or concerns, right? So we are considering those obstacles. Then, like we talked about, how can we truly activate this plan? And very importantly, to get it to stick, when would you like to check back in to see how the strategy or plan is going? Now, all of those are also basically encapsulated in our can-do goals. This is an example sheet from our high school curriculum. And I want to just step back, especially for students that have diagnosed learning differences, that might have IEPs or 504s. Being able to advocate is a goal. Like, that will take work. That will take a strategic approach, right? To be able to advocate and think about what you're going to need to advocate for, knowing how you prefer to advocate, and then planning for when and how to speak up, right? Are you just going to point to that card? Are you going to raise your hand and say what's on the card? Are you just going to wave your card in the air, right? Those are all fine. I wouldn't suggest any of them to a student. I would let a student tell me, what is your goal for even using that solution or accommodation, right? So those are goals. So in order to even decide what to advocate for, you'll want to consider obstacles. And then we also have added to the high school one, what are some support people you could reach out to help you with those obstacles? And the shift there is it flips the writing reflex. Kids do want your help, trust me. Even teenagers, they want your help. It just has to be on their terms. They have to have that autonomy and agency that they are coming to you for help rather than you swooping in and fixing their problems for them. So a couple of other ideas, just, I have so many ideas about this. I would love to hear some of yours. Again, we're hoping this talk just sparks some other ideas for you. So these are the ideas that as I was planning this talk just got sparked in my own head, was to set up something kind of like a calming corner but with a little bit more of a self-advocacy piece to it. So I would call it a self-advocacy station in the classroom, which has the elements of a calming corner. That's fine, right? Like those little fidgets and a lap pad and some headphones, that type of thing. Then we would also suggest you have a poster with a list of adjustments to consider, right? I need some weight on my body because it helps soothe me. I would like to block out some sound for a little bit. I would like to sit on the cushion on the floor so that I can stretch my body. Then they can fill out a piece of little strip of paper of kind of what brings you here. It's their entry ticket to the calming corner or self-advocacy station. They can kind of describe what's going on for them, potentially from those self-advocacy starter posters that I showed you. And then as they're done, when their time's up, they can rate how that solution worked. So you can envision just the calming corner plus advocacy turned into a self-advocacy station. Another one is an anonymous, or a name can be included, it's up to the student, but having just a self-advocacy suggestion box or some kind of way that if a student is noticing a pattern or feeling like some sort of change might be helpful, they can let the teacher know without having to walk up and tell them. And then kind of a more advanced or older version of that is to co-create email templates with students that they can save for future use to email their teacher, email their professor, send to you as their teacher or coach or counselor in certain circumstances. So that the email templates are almost like an older version of the customized card that I showed you for kids. So of course, just like I just mentioned, we'll really want to see how, when students advocate, how is it going, right? So I gave those examples of, Miss, I listen to music and then I get more work done. Well, let's find out, right? So we also are giving you a way to kind of observe and track in the moment some executive function domains in your class. So for this one, it's that a student will be able to describe their vision for an assignment and the steps involved. And you see that that also involves some sub-steps related to self-advocacy. So you can monitor which students are able to do things like name the steps to complete the assignment or name their anticipated challenges before they start. That's something you can circulate, ask those metacognitive mirroring questions, and kind of indicate on your data collection sheet to share with your team and then bring back to the student to say, well, I noticed that sometimes when you're stuck, you're not really sure what to do next. Can we talk about that tomorrow? So that data collection sheet could be really helpful. And another element of the SMARTS curriculum that I don't want to say love the most, but we really, really encourage is once students use a strategy, whether it's from our curriculum or not, that they reflect on how that strategy went. Or once they learn a strategy, think about when they would actually use it truly realistically. So these strategy planning sheets, you can see this one is for overcoming procrastination. It has some strategies that are either from the SMARTS curriculum or just regular old ideas that an adult might give them. So students get to pick which strategy they'd use and then reflect afterwards on how it went. And we offer strategy reflection sheets for everything from checking your work. Oh boy, that was that one student's least favorite thing, checking your math work, completing homework, or asking for help. And for the high school, we have things that are a little bit higher level, like studying for a test. So that brings us to the end of our metacognitive mirroring and self-advocacy session. These are the strategies that we showed you today and we hope you'll use, but more so, trust yourself, trust your process, and we hope that some of these ideas just spark more creative ideas that will work with your students. So please reach out anytime. Feel free to email me. My email is on all of your resource sheets. And I can't wait to hear how you are using these strategies to build metacognition and self-advocacy that sticks for your students.